Good morning. I'm Albrecht Schmidt. I'm from the University of Germany, and I'm here for the week, and we run a course on developing ubiquitous computing devices. I will give a short overview on sort of the motivation why I think building devices is really still something interesting, and I think over the next years will be even more interesting. And I think if we look back, technology is inevitably impacting our lives. And if you look like sort of the way we live, usually if we are serious, we don't want to go back. So perhaps for a week on a camping site, but I think in general, we don't want to go back. So I think it's something which we should sort of keep in mind. In general, sort of we make things in a way that life gets easier, gets more comfortable in a way. And interesting, sort of, it's very human to create tools to solve tasks. And that differentiates humans from other species. So I think it's at a very fundamental, or at a very fundament of what humans are. So we create technologies, we create devices to get our tasks done. And what we see over the last 10 years and probably even more over the next 20 years, technologies are going to shape the way how we experience the real world. And I think it's really hard to think how you would experience the real world without man-made things. Probably very few of you have ever experienced this. Sort of being without clothes, being in an environment that's not human-made is probably something we experience very rarely. I certainly haven't. So it's interesting. Technologies have always altered how we perceive the world around us. And at the moment, it's mainly computing devices. And what you see here, it's sort of from an in-car device, looking out on the street. It's dark outside, but you still see. Or you see things like your heartbeat on a technical device. So our perception is increasing with the ability of technologies, or with what technology offers us. And one further point is, which I think makes it very crucial that we think a lot when we build devices. Devices are used to manipulate us. And they are massively manipulating us. And I will start sort of with the one which is sort of already out there. And I take an example. So if you have at the moment a navigation system, and I drive from here, from Oulu to Helsinki, how many similar routes from the inner city of Oulu to the inner city of Helsinki will I get? How long is the drive? Did somebody drive there? 7 hours, okay. So probably it doesn't matter if one route is 5 minutes shorter than the other, because you will sort of... So if you then take an interval of 10 minutes, you probably will find something like 10, 20, 50 routes which are largely equivalent. Which one is your navigation system choosing? The shortest in time or to whatever metric. And even if it's just by a second. And what does this device? It manipulates your route, the route you're taking. And at the moment, this is sort of a stupid manipulation. It doesn't really think where you put you. And I figured out sort of, you have a supermarket in Finland which is sort of fairly ubiquitous. It's called K, or K-Market. So now imagine you are looking for a route and you put out an online auction for sort of 200 milliseconds where you say, these are the 7 routes I can give to the user, they're all the same length. What do you pay for which route? That's sort of technically something which is really a master thesis at most. It's quite easy to do. And so we see sort of, is it better to have the manipulation by something like we give it out and let people pay for it, or by a random decision which is 3 seconds cheaper? It's an interesting question. I think it's not easy to answer. And these manipulations, they happen all the time. So when you search on Google and you use a term like Oulu, how many pages come up for Oulu? Probably 500,000, 5 million, I'm not sure. Timpa is trying. So what happens is, how many times do you go onto the second search page? Very, very rarely. How many times do you go below number 5? 14 billion, okay, I underestimated. So it felt quite rural when we cycled in this morning. So, so there are 40 million billion pages, whatever. But what happens? You choose basically the first 4 or 5, and they are chosen for you by your favorite search engine. And now what happens? Is this sort of manipulation? It obviously is, because it's very unlikely that the things on page 40 are much different than the things on place 1 or 2. And so if we create technologies, we have to be aware, whatever we do, we will create manipulative, or we are manipulating the people using those technologies. It's with communication technologies, it's with navigation technologies, it's with information technologies. There's just no way around, because we impact what people do. And hence, when we build devices, we rather should think about the manipulation. I put another picture here from Yun Rikimoto, a colleague from Japan. He does the real manipulation of people, like sort of manipulating the fingers. That's another way, but I think we're already, with the devices out there, we have quite a lot of potential in manipulating people. And one last thought on devices is the speed of innovation. And I think we very often think currently the speed of innovation is very, very rapid. And probably many of you have sort of lived through the mobile phone that was sort of fairly big to the smartphone. It was about 15 years. And I'll show you another 15 years from German technology. And it's interesting. This is 1886. This is 1901. And what you see in this time, that's when the car shaped. And the change from there to there is massive. The change from this one to a current car is much less. Obviously, there are many new things in there, but conceptually, we still have the same steering wheels, we still have the same controls. So it's interesting to be at the beginning when a technology is shaped. And I think if you look further, there are obviously changes, but it's interesting that at the beginning, a lot of the definition happens. I will now start with sort of a short recap of Ubicom, and then sort of the question, what comes beyond? So many of you have probably read the article, The Computer for the 21st Century by Mark Weiser. Kaisa, I already earlier quoted on calm technologies, and I like this quote. The most profound technologies are those that disappear, they weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it. And I think this is sort of very much the essence. And that happened with a lot of things we have nowadays. The mobile phone is one. A lot of computing devices are more of those. And I think we don't really realize the use of computing then. And if we look at this, sort of, if we draw this, it's this movement from people share a computer to everybody has one, everything is a computer. What is next? What is the next thing? Because we are obviously here. So what are the next things? And I don't have the answer, but I have sort of some thoughts I'd like to share with you. And it's a vision from 2 angles. So one is a paradigm shift in communication, and the other one is the steep increase in media capture. And I will start with the first one. So far, the default communication we are using is closed communication. So when we set up sort of my coming here for the summer school, most of the stuff went over email or SMS, and it was by default not public. Even so, I think most emails I got from you, they could have been published with no, and probably most of my replies as well. And so the question is, why did we choose to do this non-public? Because the next person, another person organizing a summer school, would have probably benefited or could benefit in the future from all those communications. And so I think the old world, defined by technology, we are going sort of the way where we don't use open communication, we use closed one-to-one communication. And what I think what is going to happen in the future is that we much more use open communication technologies. And we see things like Twitter, Facebook, and probably there are more new things to come. So I would guess we get a paradigm change. If it's not secret, it will be open. Only if we decide to have it secret, we will use a channel that is then sort of just between the two or the group of people. And this will increase transparency. It will make life in a lot of things much easier because we have examples of how things are done. And the second part is a steep increase in media capture. And at the moment, what you do, even sort of the massive numbers of pictures you take on a holiday, it's still a decision you take the picture, a decision to take the video. But I guess in the near future, and I think Google Glass, even so in the current design, it's different. But it's one of those steps towards this, we capture everything because it's cheap, it doesn't cost anything. And we only think at those things we don't want to capture and explicitly exclude them from capturing. Now just give it a thought. How many people in Finland are at the moment cleaning their windows? Probably you have 4.5 million people. How often do you clean your windows? Once a year. So that's me. So you can calculate that it takes sort of 3 hours. There are a lot of people at the moment cleaning windows. So now we could figure out what is the best way to clean windows. We look at how long it takes people and how clean they are afterwards. And if they all would record, or only 20% of them, we could get this data instantly. I think this gives you the power. If we think everything that people do is recorded, we can step back into it, can use this information. And it will create a huge body of knowledge. It will change the way we have access to information. Basically, everything people do will be available. And now imagine there's 100 million people, that's about 20% in Europe, will collect and share in real time what they hear, see, and we could include further sensors. So you could imagine you have something, I put a Facebook page here because that's easy. You have a personal video stream of all those 100 million. You could probably look at the airport in Oulu because there are more than 10 people. One of them will share. You can see are there sort of delays. You wouldn't need to have even a web page because somebody is looking at the screen there. You could just tap in there. And again, this is sort of technology-wise not very simple at the moment if it's done by 100 million. If it's done by one person, it's again sort of on the scale of a master project to do something like this. And so my argument is, if we index such information by location, by context, etc., we will have a huge variety of information available without any extra effort. And I think the technologies that are popping up at the moment are just a step into this direction. And what does this lead to? In medium term, that will lead to that we overcome the long-standing temporal and spatial boundaries of human perception. So I think we have already, with mobile telephony, overcome communication barriers over space. And I could imagine that with capture technologies, within 50 years, we are at a point where it's not really clear whether it's local, whether it's remote, whether it's historic, whether it's current. And I think that's really interesting now, because over the next 20 years, those technologies I'm talking about, they will become available. The network bandwidth will become available, the devices for capture will become available, the storage will become available. And I think the transition we see for our society coming is very much this transition depicted here from where oral society went to a written society. And now we are sort of still in a written society where we choose what to capture. It's often very much easier than writing it down, but we still make the choice what to capture. And in the next step, what's coming here, it's likely that we don't choose what to capture, we only choose what not to capture. And that's probably changing massively the way we live. And what this leads to is, in the end, that ethics and values become the central design material of this century. Because technology will not be the part that hinders us from doing that. It will be sort of the question whether we want it or not. I have just a few old pictures and coming back to more the device side. So I think what we see at the moment, a lot of devices, objects become either computing objects or they become applications. And we have seen this for cameras. And camera is an interesting thing. We have done one part of the transition very well, like the capture part. We haven't done the sharing and the storage one very well. So I'm not sure who of you has set up something in case something should happen to them, that their pictures are given to their loved ones. That's not a lot. So I remember when my grandfather died 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I got a box, a shoe box with pictures. And that's quite a valuable memory. At the moment, most of us are not prepared to have this. So it's interesting, the moment technologies are changed, we often change one part but don't change the second one. For maps, the same. And now the question is, what devices do we want? Where do we want to go with devices? And it's interesting. I would guess medium term anything that has value. And I picked stuff where you can buy on the internet computing devices from dog collar to suitcases, etc. They have essentially become computing devices. And as prices fall, this will go on and will become mainstream. But I think the motivation for having computing in there is very often very close to human nature. And I put this picture up. Does anybody know what this picture is? You know? Yeah? So it's the 7 sins, the 7 deadly sins. And I think this is something, I have this usually in a talk when I talk about business plans. And if you can't put your business plan, if you cannot pin down one of the sins, it's very unlikely that this is making a good business. And you can do the same for devices. If devices don't appeal to one of those sins, be it lust, be it laziness, it's probably not going to work. So this is something this week when we talk about what devices we build. We can take this a bit more serious, looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, sort of, it's the same, a bit more scientific. And here the interesting part is it's very easy in retrospective to go into Maslow's hierarchy of needs and ask, why does a certain technology work? The other way around is really hard. So if we take something like Twitter or Facebook, looking at this, it's very easy to understand that this appeals sort of to the screen part very much. But in foresight, to think of a new technology like Facebook or Twitter with this is pretty hard. But the other way around, this is sort of quite a good tool to think about new technologies. And I think one further angle to look at technologies and devices is that devices are more and more becoming a means of self-expression. So the phone people have carried over the last 10 years, I think 2003-04 that has started, that it became a means of self-expression to show off who you are by the devices you carry. And I think we have seen this in the car industry and in fashion, in food. And I think the hair is an interesting thing. If you look at different hairstyles, and you don't need to look here, you can look around, a lot of the hairstyle is probably not purely utilitarian. Mine is mainly utilitarian, but they're having people much sort of nicer hairstyles with probably more effort in the morning. And so I think this is one thing for devices as well. I think designing purely utilitarian is probably not hitting the point, and I think that's where we link to what Kaisa and Jonna are doing. It's about the experience, and I think the experience is not only what you experience, but also what people around you experience. And I think final point here, what do we want? I think our understanding of privacy is rapidly changing, and privacy is by all means not the only value we care. If you ask people if they want to have privacy, yes. If you ask people, do you have free food and you give me your address? It's less clear. So privacy is always sort of in a mix of values. And we wrote some years back, privacy is sacred, but really cheap. Now, what do we do this week? We enable smart objects. We build smart objects. And what are those enablers for smart objects? One part is that we have a huge variety of consumer devices, like phones, like tablets, etc. And we could really imagine to replace the center of devices I show up here with those things. And I give you one example of a sewing machine. There's a big difference when you buy a sewing machine for €100 or for €800 in the mechanics. If you buy a sewing machine for €800 or €4,000, the difference in the mechanics is very minor. The difference comes through the big display. And so it's really interesting to see what will happen if we can integrate consumer devices into such devices. That's one route to explore. And I think here are some examples. Another driver for this is that the creation of custom shapes has become really, really easy. Here are examples of 3D prints of laser cutting things. So we can create objects, and objects can be sort of sent as data. And the final part is that creating real functional computing is very simple. And that's one of the examples we will look at tomorrow morning in our course. It's basically we will take an hour and build a fully functional digital camera which each of us can program, and then take it from there at sensing, at actuation, etc., at networking. And so those are the three enablers I see that make it really feasible that we get smart objects going. And within a week, the idea is to get really something going. And now what are the implications of this? And I think there are just a few questions. I will put them out, and perhaps there's later time to discuss them, or we can discuss them over the week. What if products are just software and blueprints that people instantiate at home? So basically, we have asked this question some time back: when can I download and print my phone? And it's probably 10, 15, 20 years away, but perhaps less. What does this mean? Another question: what if your device is only appeals to 1 in 10,000? That's really not a cool thing in Oulu. If you design something for which appeals to, it's only applicable to Oulu and it appeals to 1 in 10,000. That's probably not a good idea. The moment, if it's in all over Finland, it may be a good business case. If you make $100 on each, that's probably close to a yearly salary. The moment it appeals to the whole European Union or to North America, you're in a different case. And if you look at Kickstarter, there are a lot of things where you look at it and you think, oh, I wouldn't like that, and how can anybody like this? And then it ends up having 500 people buying it off Kickstarter. And so it's interesting to think at things which are not mainstream when we think about devices. And I think the other angle on this is, what if a personal health monitor costs much less than 30 minutes with your doctor? And I think what we see as prices for technology fall, the reason to get one may have sort of, may be lower and lower. The hurdle to get one may be lower, lower and lower. And then sort of the question, what is if everything is context aware? That's from where we come research-wise. And I think in smart objects, one key issue is to dare to be specific. I think that's the argument I made earlier with 1 in 10,000. I think it becomes interesting if we have really, really specific things. We have worked over the last years on public display, specific technologies for specific places. I have recently talked to people who do plant watering devices, very specific. The world market is not 1 billion. The world market is typically a few 10,000s. But this is still a valid business case because those people who want it really want it and pay for it. And now sort of, what are we going to do this week? We will explore technologies. We come from a technology angle. We will play with technologies. And we will explore new bedside devices. Those are examples which are out there, alarm clocks, etc. And we take this as a use case. So probably all of us know over the next 10 years, those devices on our bedside table will change. And we will try during this week to find out what we can do with new actuation, new sensing, new communication means at the bedside. And here as sort of a final slide, that's what interests us in our research. It's interaction with all senses in different contexts, from the car to playing to the office, from brain interfaces to tabletops. And with this, I like to close. And if there are questions.